Edward the Blue Engine was taking a special goods train to Brigham docks. The ship that his goods were carrying was to depart by sunset, so he had to arrive before then. The load was very heavy, so Edward had to pull as hard as he could. He pulled so hard, there was a shrieking crack. He recognized this sound. "I've broken a crank pin again, haven't I?" he said. "I'm afraid so," said his driver. "Not to worry, we know what to do." And he, the fireman, and conductor removed Edward's siderods and listened to couplings on the train. "Now that's done, let's try to get moving," said the driver. Edward started up again. He pulled as hard as he could, but no matter how hard he pulled, he only managed to inch a yard before they all heard another cracking noise. "That's torn it," said the driver. "Now you've burst your safety valve. We shan't get anywhere today." "Bother," said Edward. "The ship will leave without the load." His crew noticed in an old shed by the line. "If there is a telephone in there, I can call for help," said the driver. Edward gave the shed a long stare. "There's something familiar about that shed, but I can't quite put my buffers on it," he said. "Do you mind? I'm trying to—" "Oh, hello, Charlie. Great to see you again," came a voice from inside the shed. "That voice sounds familiar," Edward said to himself. His driver returned. "Driver, I think an old friend of ours is in there," he said. "Indeed it is," his driver teased. Edward's crew loaded some of Edward's coal into an old wheelbarrow they found in the shed and returned it to it. "Sure, I can get you to the fitter's yard," the voice said. "Let's just hope your boiler holds," said the fireman. "You've been in here for decades." Outside, Edward heard a strange clanking noise. "Is that who I think it is?" he wondered out loud. "You bet it is," his driver said. Once the doors was fully swung open, out of the shed came a dirty and old steam truck. They recognized each other. "Elizabeth, is that you?" "Edward? Edward, it is you, dear!" "It's great to see you again," said Edward. "It's great to see you, too," Elizabeth said. "Charlie and Sydney told me about your situation. Are you all right?" "Oh, yes," said Edward. "I'm all right. I just need to have some parts replaced." "It's a good thing you guys found my shed. Otherwise that shed will leave without that load of yours. No need to worry any longer. Now that I'm in steam again, I can fetch your crank pin and safety valve." Edward's driver climbed into Elizabeth's cab, and they headed off to the fitter's yard. "I won't be long," Elizabeth told her old friend. "Be careful out there," Edward called as Elizabeth rode out of sight. Out on the road, Edward's driver was concerned. Elizabeth was making awful grinding noises. "You're losing steam," he called to her. "Just catching my breath, Charlie dear," Elizabeth said. "Ah, right. I guess I forgot." Once they made it over the hill, they soon reached the Croven Skate Works and picked up the replacement parts. And soon, they were on their way back to the shed. But then, they heard a loud whistle. It was George the steamroller, and, as you might expect, he was cross. "What are you supposed to be? An old steam truck?" he growled. "That will be a vintage steam truck to you, young man," Elizabeth said firmly. "I'm delivering parts for my old friend Edward." "That old steam pot? Ha!" scoffed George. "Railways are no good. Turn 'em into roads. As for you, Grandma, You're too slow. Find yourself a scrapyard. Says the one who's much slower than vintage trucks like me. Do yourself a favor and do something with those manners of yours, Elizabeth snapped as she drove off. George just ignored Elizabeth's comeback and carried on down the road. When Elizabeth returned to the shed, she was still cross. There! Got your purse for you. And next time, don't be so careless, she scolded. Edward was shocked at this remark. Elizabeth, what's wrong? Did something happen out on the road? Elizabeth then realized. Oh, my dear, she exclaimed. Edward, I am so sorry. I'm really sorry for snapping like that. I've seemed to have an outburst. Did something happen while you were out? Edward asked. Unfortunately, yes, sighed Elizabeth, and she told Edward about her encounter with George. So you met George, huh? The whole railway knows about him, and sure, he isn't a friendly one. I suggest that you just ignore him. Very wise, Edward dear, Elizabeth said. Soon, Edward was repaired and in steam again. He and Elizabeth said goodbye and steamed off to the docks. They soon arrived with plenty of time to spare. Did something happen during journey? Asked Sir Topham Hatt. I'm something did, sir, Edward said, and he told Sir Topham Hatt about his breakdown and how they found Elizabeth. Did you say you found Elizabeth? My father's first truck? He asked. We sure did, sir, the fireman said. Sir Topham Hatt grew excited. Take us to where you found her shed, he said. Edward and Sir Topham Hatt arrived at Elizabeth's shed. Oh, hello again, Edward dear, Elizabeth said. Oh, I see you brought a guest. Sir Charles Topham Hatt stepped out of his blue car. Elizabeth, it's good to see my father's first truck. I thought you'd been lost. So you're controller now, Charles? Elizabeth asked. I am indeed, said Sir Topham Hatt, and he told Elizabeth everything that happened the day she had been stored away in a shed. Then Elizabeth told Sir Topham Hatt how she'd been stored away when younger and faster automobiles came around the railway. Finally, Edward went to tell Elizabeth his many adventures, from saving James from becoming a runaway due to two careless boys, to how he managed to get some tourists home with a broken crank bin on a stormy night. She was amazed. You've been through quite a lot, it seems, she told her old friend. You can say that again, Edward smiled. Later that day, Sir Topham Hatt asked Jim Cole to restore Elizabeth to original beauty. Sure I can, sir, Jim said. In no time, Elizabeth's maroon paintwork and black gold lining were soon shining in the sunlight. In addition, on both of her doors were a small memorial plaque that read, In memory of Sir Bertram Topham Hatt, 1880-1956. Your father will be proud of that plaque, sir, said Edward. He definitely is, Edward, Sir Topham Hatt replied. They all looked up the sky and thought they could make out the faint outline of a familiar controller who wore the same suit as Sir Charles did, and sharing a warm smile. Elizabeth now works at the Brighton branch line, and she quite enjoys it. She soon made great friends with Trevor, Bill, Ben, Boko, and Barry. And other times, she'll help out on the Scullery Railway. And even though Elizabeth is vintage, everyone agrees that she'll be forever grand no matter what.